Okay, factoring trinomials, we are working backwards. We have to undo the distributive property. Let's try the distributive problem to see the steps we have to reverse. Well, we got really good at this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to FOIL. I have a 2x squared. 2x times a negative 1 is a negative 6x. Inside is 1 times x, so that's just a plus x. And my last terms, 1 times a negative 3 is negative 3. Okay? And let's not forget, overall, which I usually write down first, the 2 that's out in front. So now I'm going to combine like terms, and I get 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. And I still have my 2 out in front, which now gets to distribute. And I get 4x squared minus 10x minus 6. And if you'll notice, that is the one that we're factoring in our second column. So they gave us some steps to help us do this. Okay? So it says, first pull out the greatest common factor if there is one. So as I look at this, I have a 4, a 10, and a 6. I'm going to have to factor out a 2. So this is going to be 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. And if you'll notice, that's what it is at this step right here. And then it says, okay, what can make the first term ax squared? Put them in the first spots. So we're going to put them here and here. Okay, so I still have my 2 out in front, but now I'm breaking it into a binomial. So I say, okay, well, I notice that there's a 2 and I have an x squared, where x squared is easy to break up. It's always an x and an x. But I have this 2, and the only way I can get 2 is a 2 and a 1. So I'm going to put the 2 here, and you can write a 1 here if you want, but most people don't. Okay, now it says what makes the last term. Well, if I look at it, my last term is a 3. So the only way I can get a factors of 3 are a 1 and a 3. So I'm going to say, okay, well, a 1 and a 3, so I have to decide where I want to put them. So in my mind, I'm just going to guess. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to put a 1 here and a 3 here. And I need a negative 3, so one of them has to be a negative. So I'm going to put the negative here and the positive here. Okay? And then the last step, think about what will combine to make the numbers in the middle term. So think about what will make a negative 5. Okay? So now let's check it. You always check your answer. Okay, so the 2 out in front doesn't matter. It's all about these ones inside. So I'm not going to draw these arcs because it gets a little bit confusing, but I am still going to do it. So I do 2x times by x gives me 2x squared. 2x times by a negative 3 gives me a negative 6x. 1 times by x gives me plus 1x. 1 times by a negative 3 gives me a negative 3. And as you look at what's inside your parentheses, your first term and your last term will always match because you chose the numbers that way. It's the inside, it's the x's or the b's that you have to watch out for. So if I have a negative 6 and I add 1 to it, I have a negative 5x. Is that what's right there? If your answer is yes, then you put a box around your factored form because you just got it right. Okay? Well, now let's try some more. So if you flip over to the next page, we have some that says, okay, more examples. These are good practice. This is a good where factoring is a concept where good practice truly does make perfect. This is the first time you've done this. We can't give up. We have to keep trying. So the first thing I notice on the first one is there's no number in front of the x squared. So I don't have to worry about it, so I can go to the next step, which is breaking it into 2 binomials. So what will make an x squared? Well, an x times an x makes an x squared. So then I have to look at the 8. And I say, okay, well, what times what gives me 8? Well, writing my factors down, I say, okay, I have a 1 and an 8, a 2 and a 4, and I'm back to the 4, right? So I need something that when it multiplies, I get an 8, a positive 8, and when it adds or subtracts, I get a negative 6. Okay, so if I look at the first one, if I put a 1 and an 8 in there, I'm either going to get a positive 7 or a negative 7. So that's not going to help me. If I put in a 9 or a negative 9. So let's look at the 2 and the 4. I'm just guessing that those will work. So if I put a 2 here and a 4 here, and I want this to be a positive, but when they add to be a negative, what are my two signs going to have to be inside? They're going to have to be subtraction. Okay, because the only way I can multiply and get a positive is if I have a negative times a negative, or a positive times a positive will also give me a positive. Okay, so let's check this. If I do x times x, I get x squared. If I do x times a negative 4, I get negative 4x. If I get negative 2 times x, I get negative 2x. And a negative 2 times a negative 4 makes a positive 8. So now x squared matches. I have to check my inside. So I have negative 4x minus 2x makes a negative 6x. Does that match my term in the middle up at the top? It does. So this is my factored form. Okay? Well, so yes, it did work when I checked it. So now looking at the next one, I would say, okay, well, I notice this has a 3, a 9, and a 6, and those are all multiples of 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3. Okay, and now that I factored out the 3, it just comes along for the ride, but I'm going to break it up into binomials. So I have x squared, and the only way I can get an x squared is if I do an x times an x, and then so I need a way to multiply to get a 2 and add or subtract to get a 3. So this is a 2. So 2 and 1 is the only way I can get it. And the only way I can do this is if to get to multiply to get a positive is I have to have a negative or a positive or a positive. Well, if I want to get a positive 3, that means my answers or the terms I'm going to times by must be positive. Does it matter where I put the 2 and the 1? No, because there's no number in front. Numbers in front of the x change the rules a little bit. And then let's check it. So I know I still have a 3 out front, but I'm checking to see if I get this same thing inside. So I have x times x makes x squared. X times 1 makes plus 1x plus 2x plus 2. Okay? First term always matches. Last term always matches. It's all about these. So I have 1x plus 2x gives me 3x. Does that match what I have right there? It does. So this is my factored answer. So yes, it worked. Okay. Well, now I look at the next one and I say, okay, well, I have a 2, a 5, and a 3. Is there anything that I can take out of those that will make my life easier? No. So that means I'm going to have to start factoring it. And I'm going to have to think about that 2 in front of the x as I go through this. So I have a 2x squared, so I'm going to get a 2x here and a 1x here. And then I need to multiply to get a 3, and it's a positive 3. So I have a 1 times a 3. So I'm going to multiply this number by this number and get a 3. Well, I just say we try one. So I'm going to put the 1 here and the 3 here. And since this is positive, I'm going to try a plus and a plus. Okay, so we try it and we go 2x times x makes 2x squared. 2x times 3 makes plus 6x. 1 times x makes plus 1x. and 1 times 3 makes plus 3. Remember, it's all about my inside terms. So I have 6x plus 1x. Does that give me a 5? No, it gave me a 7. So I need to try something else. I'm going to switch my numbers. I think my signs are okay. I'm going to try switching my numbers. So I'm going to cross out what I had here. If you were doing this with pencil, I would hope you would just erase it. But sometimes it's nice to have the ones you've tried up above. So now I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to try this. The 2x was fine, and the x was fine, but I'm going to try the 3 here and the 1 here. I'm just going to switch my numbers around to see if it worked. So again, cross that out. So now I'm going to check this one. So I'll check it with this color. So 2x times x gives me 2x squared. 2x times 1 gives me plus 2x. 3 times x gives me plus 3x plus 3. Okay, so I check my inside terms. I have 2x plus 3x makes 5x. Okay, well, does 5x match what I have up here? It does. So this second chance is the one that works. So yes, it worked, but it took us a couple times. And that's why you can't be afraid to be like, okay, I got to try it again. So try some on your own. So now I want you to pause the video, and I want you to go through and do at least these two. We'll talk about this one in a minute, but go through and at least do these. Try them, see what you get. Okay, so now we're going to start with try some on your own. And I notice it has a 5 and a 3 and a 2. So again, nothing comes out to make our life easier. So we know we're going to have a 5x and an x. And then I need to get a negative 2. So the only way I can multiply and get a 2 in general is a 1 and a 2. But I need to get a negative 2, so that means one of them has to be negative, and I need to get a negative 3 when I add them together. Plus we have a 5. Oh dear, I'm just going to try something. I'm going to put the 1 here, I'm going to put the 2 here, I'm going to make this one positive and this one negative. I'm literally just trying something. So I do 5x times x gives me 5x squared. 5x times a negative 2 gives me a negative 10x. 1 times x gives me plus x. 1 times a negative 2 gives me a negative 2. So I check my inside terms. Okay, I have a negative 10 plus x, a negative 10x plus x gives me a negative 9x. Did that give me anything close to my 3x? No. So that means I want to try changing my numbers around. Okay, so I'm going to keep the signs the same, but I'm going to make this one a 2 and this one a 1. Okay, so now I have, I'll do it in the blue like I did before, 5x plus 2 and an x minus 1. So all I did was switch the 1 and the 2. Okay, so let's try this again. 5x times x makes 5x squared, which it should. We chose the numbers. 5x times 1 makes a negative 5x. 2 times x makes plus 2x. And then minus 2. Okay, checking our inside term. I have a negative 5x plus 2x makes a negative 3x. Does that match what we had up here? It does. So this one's gone, and this was actually my answer. Okay? Remember, this can take more than one time, and the more you do this, the faster you get, and you don't have to check it. You'll always have to check it, but you get so you're better at it. So on this one, I notice it doesn't have a number in front of it. Yay, no leading coefficient in front of the x squared. So x squared breaks up into an x and an x. And then I need to get a negative 18 and a positive 17. Okay, so if I think of my factors, 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. And I know one needs to be a positive and one needs to be a negative, or else I couldn't get a negative. So a negative times a positive equals a negative, it's also positive times a negative equals a negative. Okay, my signs are different. So as I look at this, I say, okay, I need to get an 18, and then I need to get a 17. Well, which ones are even close to that? If I did a 2 and a 9, when I had different signs, I'm going to get a 7. So I think that one's out. I'm going to try this one. Okay? And because my 17 is positive, I'm going to try the 18 here. Okay, so now let's check it. X times x makes x squared. X times a negative 1 makes negative 1x. Plus 18x minus 18. Okay, check my inside term. Negative x plus 18x makes 17x. Does my inside terms match? Yes. So this is my answer. Remember to box your answer so we can actually tell what's going on. Okay, this one is a special case. Notice it has a 4x squared minus a 25. So it doesn't have a b, and 4 and 25 are perfect squares. So that means my b has to cancel out when I FOIL this out. Sorry, factor this out. So you look at it and say, okay, well, what makes a 4? Well, a 1 and a 4 or a 2 and a 2. But I need to have the same thing in all my places in order for the b to pass out. So cross out. So this needs to be a 2 and a 2. And there's always an x with it. Okay, and then 25, well, the only way to get that is a 5 and a 5. And then what must my signs be in order for my b to cross out? One will be a positive, one will be a negative. Okay, putting it all together. So now not only do we know how to write them in the different forms, it means that we know more key values. And we've been doing key features for a while, over and over and over again. Okay. So first of all, as I look at this one, I notice it has a negative x squared plus 10x plus 15. So I notice that it has multiples of 5, and the number in front is negative. So I want to take out a negative 5 so that I don't even have to think about it anymore. So now I have an x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay, well, the negative 5 hangs around. But I'm going to break this into two binomials. Oh, wait. First of all, what could we have found just from the original? That's right. We could have found the y-intercept. So our y-intercept is 0, 15. It's just our c. We look right here. It's going to be 0, negative 6. We look on this one. Well, I have no constant, so it's just 0, 0. Now going back to this, I know that my x squared is going to break up into an x and an x. And then I know I need to get a negative 3. So we have a 1 times a 3. So that means that we have, we need it to be negative. So I'm going to do a negative 3 and a positive 1. Okay. And then I'm going to check this one because it's, you know, a little bit trickier than this one up here. So I'm going to say we have an x squared, still have the 5 in front, plus 1x minus 3x minus 3. Okay, check your inside terms. So that gives me a negative 2x. Does that match what I have right here? It does. So that means I just found the factored form. Remember, we find the zeros from the factored form. So in this case, what could I put in here to find a 0? Well, that would be 3, 0. What would I put in here to make this parenthesis 0? I'd put in a negative 1. Minus 1 would give me a 0. Okay? So let's look at the next one. The next one doesn't have a number in front of x, so no greatest common factor. So we just break it apart into its two binomials. Binomials means, we learned that definition last time, two parentheses, two terms in each. Okay? So x squared and x squared. I know that I need to get a negative 6, so I have 1 times 6, 2 times 3, and that's the only way you can get 6. And I have a 5, a positive 5. So that means I'm going to have a positive and a negative, because that's the only way that I can get a negative 6. And if I put a positive 2 and a negative 3, that's going to give me a negative 1. So I'm going to try the 6 here, because the 6 is bigger, which matches this, and a 1. Okay, and then I'm going to test this. X times x, x squared. X times negative 1 is negative 1x, plus 6x minus 6. Okay, so my inside term is a positive 5x. Does that match what I have up here? Yes. So that is my factored form. So if I'm looking for my zeros, what would I put inside my first parenthesis to make this a 0? A negative 6 comma 0. What if I was to put it inside the second parenthesis? Well, I'd need to put in a 1 comma 0. Okay? Last but not least, we already found our key feature for our y-intercept. Well, now we look at it and we say, okay, I have 3x squared minus 2x. So that means that I could factor out an x because both pieces have an x. And you have already got it into factored form. Okay? You don't need to put parentheses, but I have some kids that are like, I like to see it as factored form like that. So I can see it's a parenthesis times a parenthesis. Okay? Whatever works for you. Most of the time you're just going to see it as that. Okay? Well, because I have a parenthesis right here, what would be inside that in order to make it a 0? Well, it would be a 0. If I have a 0, 0 here, I better have 1 also on the x-axis. Okay, then I have to look at this one, and it takes a few more steps. I have 3x minus 2, and I want to see what I'd plug in there to make a 0. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. 3x equals 2. I get 2/3 comma 0. Okay? Now, pause what you're doing, set a timer for 3 minutes, and go through and do these. I'm pretty much just going to give you the answers. I'm not going to walk you through how to do them. So, break it apart. We get x squared. I need to get a 28, and it's an 11. So 28 would be a plus 4 plus 7. Okay? This one I can factor out a 2 and get x squared minus 13 plus 40. So 2's out in front. Break it apart again. X and an x. Sorry, there should be an x there. I need to get 40 when it multiplies, but add to get a negative. So these are going to be negative numbers. And 5 times 8 is 40, and when I add it together it's 13. So a 5 and an 8. Okay, this one I have the x's break apart. I need to get a negative 28, so negative and a positive. And I need to get a positive 3, so the 7 better be the bigger one. 4. Okay, this one has a leading coefficient of 5. And I need to get a positive 3, but a negative 8. So I'm betting my signs are going to be negative. And if I put a 3 here, 5 times 3 is going to be 15. So I'm going to put the 3 there and the 1 there. 5 times 1, negative 1 is a negative 5, and a negative 3 right there makes a negative 8. So that's my answer. Okay, break these apart. I get x and x. I know I need a positive, so either has to be a plus and plus or a minus and minus. This is a negative, so it's going to be a minus and minus. And they've done 28 3 times now, so I'm betting it's going to be a 7 and a 4. Times that, get the positive, add 7, a negative 7 and negative 4, get an 11. Negative 11. Last one, can't take out the 3. I need to get a negative 4, so that's going to be a 1 and a 4, or 2 times a 2. If I did 3 times 2, that's going to give me a 6. And I'm only going to have another 2 there, so that's not going to be big enough. I'm betting it's going to be the 4 and the 1. And I think the 4 is going to go here and the 1 is going to go there. The bigger one's going to be positive. So 3 times 4 is 12x. 1 times x is minus 1x. Gives me a positive 11x, which is what I have. Okay. If you have any questions, make sure you come in because we're just going to go one step further the next day. Math lab is open in the mornings except for Tuesday from 6:45 to 7:15. Every day after school except for Friday until 7:30. It's in the 1300s hall. I believe the room number is 1312. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.